They were here long before humanity built its first fire. The ancient ones walked under alien skies, silent and unseen, with minds vast and linked to the very pulse of the universe. They carved one law into their civilization's foundation: avoid humans. Not because of their weapons or their wars, but because humans change things. They disturb what is still. They inspire what should stay buried. Kaelin was born into obedience. A guardian in training, raised on doctrines etched in crystal and reinforced by dream visions from the elders. He knew the rule. Everyone did. And yet, when the human crashed through the sky in a metal coffin of fire and smoke, something in him moved. He found her barely alive in the wetlands beyond the border wards. Her blood smelled like ozone and copper. Her breath came in short gasps. His first instinct had been to leave her, to let time or the marsh consume her. But she looked up, bruised, broken, defiant, and smiled. He told himself he'd only stabilize her. He'd walk away. But night after night, he returned. He brought her nutrient sap, treated her wounds with resin paste, and eventually, spoke to her. She called herself Ava. A pilot, stranded. Human. Kaelin should have reported her. Instead, he began listening. She spoke of a world he'd only seen in distorted archives, of oceans vast and hungry, of art that defied language, of choices made without permission. She told him about her brother, who died saving others because he chose to, even when ordered not to. In her stories, Kaelin heard something dangerous: freedom wrapped in grief. The elders noticed. Their minds were wired to the nexus of collective thought. Something foreign flickered in the field, like static in a perfect frequency. They didn't know yet what it was. But they began to search. Kaelin started to dream in ways he never had. Not visions from the nexus, but chaotic, vivid dreams. Emotionally raw. Human. He was changing. One night, while bringing Ava fermented barkwada, he asked her why humans disobey. She looked at him, half smiling through cracked lips, and said, "Because obedience without reason is just fear wearing a crown." Kaelin couldn't forget that. He trained harder, hoping discipline would drown the doubt. But the more he fought it, the clearer the human's words became. The elders' law wasn't about protection, it was about control. Soon, Ava could walk short distances. He fashioned her a cloak from woven bark fiber and helped her move deeper into the marsh, under cover of heavy root structures. But time was slipping. The recovery drones were sweeping wider now. During a memory-sharing ritual, Kaelin entered the nexus alongside his peers. As their minds linked, Ava's face flashed through his thoughts, just for a moment. But it was enough. The elders tore from the connection in alarm. "There is contamination," one whispered. Others demanded a private session with Kaelin. He claimed ignorance. They watched his mind carefully but found no direct trace. Still, their suspicion grew like rotten timber. That night, Kaelin didn't return to Ava. She waited alone, still half healing, watching the alien moons shift above. Hours passed. When Kaelin did come, he looked broken. "They felt you," he said simply. "It's only a matter of time now." Ava didn't ask him to run. She knew what he'd risked. What he was still risking. The next day, he returned to his duties, his final act of routine. But as he trained alongside the other guardians, one of the drones activated a silent alarm. A scan of the wetlands revealed inconsistent heat signatures. They followed the trail. Kaelin reached Ava's shelter before the others. "They're coming," he said. "I can stall them for moments, no more." Ava stood. "Then don't stall. Show me the way out." They didn't make it far. A circle of guardians emerged from the mist, weapons not drawn, yet. At the center stood Elder Seelan, her presence cold and immense. She looked at Kaelin first, then the human. No anger. Only disappointment. "You were warned," she said. Kaelin stepped in front of Ava, but she moved beside him. She met the elder's gaze and spoke, "Your fear isn't of me. It's of what I do to him." Seelan nodded once. Exactly. Without further trial, the sentence was given. Ava would be returned to her wreck and sealed inside, a passive execution. Kalen would be cast out, stripped of his name and tether, condemned to drifting. No communication. No identity. No return. They were separated. Kalen didn't speak as his tether was removed. The pain wasn't physical, but it reached into parts of the self that had never known silence. As the connection to the nexus dimmed, a void opened. Ava was shackled to a transport unit, silent but watching. As the vessel rose into the sky, she turned to look at Kalen one last time. He didn't look away. He would not give them that. Ava didn't expect to wake up. But she did, gasping in the sealed cockpit of her ship, alone, the air stale and thinning. The elders hadn't killed her outright. They just ensured the conditions would do it for them. No food. No signal. No tools. Just slow decay. She pulled at the restraints until her wrists bled. Screamed into silence. Time warped inside the broken metal tomb, hours collapsing into each other. Every breath was a rebellion. She was supposed to die here. Kalen, somewhere beyond the veil, drifted between voids. Stripped of identity, he no longer existed in the minds of his people. The drifting exile wasn't death, but it was worse in some ways. A living ghost, severed from all connection, no longer visible to the neural lattice that bound their kind. The world no longer acknowledged him. And yet, he felt her, dim and distant, somehow still alive. He wandered beyond the mapped lands, a region his people had long abandoned, where thought didn't reach and rules no longer held power. In that silence, he found something else, the rogues. They weren't legends. They were real. And they had been watching. The rogues welcomed him without question. No one asked what he'd done. They recognized the look in his eyes. They wore it too. They were artists, thinkers, former guardians, even former elders. All had broken the law in some way, some for love, some for truth, some for nothing more than the desire to choose. Among them was Islan, older than most, with metallic skin marked by solar damage and tattoos made from stardust. Islan didn't need Kalen to speak. You chose a human, he said. And now you're here. Kalen asked one thing, was it possible to reach Ava? Islan studied him in silence. Then answered, it depends how far you're willing to burn the sky. Back at the boundary, a technician, young, silent, nameless, accessed a restricted memory cache. She had seen Kalen's trial. She remembered how he looked at the human. How the human looked back. Something in her cracked. She opened an encrypted channel. Just a pulse of data. Not a message. But it was enough. The rogues intercepted the signal. Coordinates. A last known location. Faint life signature. Ava was alive. Kalen didn't hesitate. The rogues gave him a map, a skimmer, and one warning: the elders were watching everything. If he crossed back into territory, he wouldn't be exiled again. He'd be erased. He left that night. The skimmer was old, barely functional, but fast. Kalen navigated by memory and instinct, hugging canyons and clouds to avoid detection. Days blurred. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every moment Ava breathed was a moment he still had to save her. He reached her ship just before collapse. The metal had begun to buckle from environmental pressure. Oxygen levels were critical. He burned through the hatch with stolen tech and pulled her from the wreck. Her lips were blue. She barely registered him. But her eyes opened. You came back, she whispered. I never left, he answered. They didn't linger. Kalen carried her onto the skimmer and vanished back into the roguelands. No trail. No beacon. Just a fading vapor stream and silence. As Ava recovered in the hidden valley, she met the rogues. They treated her like a myth. Not a threat. Not a mistake. But a signal. She spoke to them. Told them about Earth. About collapse and rebirth. About how sometimes, the worst of humanity also made way for the best. She didn't try to inspire them. She didn't know she had. Whispers spread through the rogue camps. Of a human who survived the elders. Of a guardian who defied exile. The elders heard them too. They always did. That's when the purge began. Without warning, the elders deployed sentinels, machines designed to eliminate thought anomalies. They swept through rogue lands like fire. No arrests. Just eradication. Structures turned to ash. Fields melted. Voices fell silent. But the rogues didn't scatter. They gathered. For the first time in a generation, they stood together. Ava and Kaelin stood with them. They couldn't fight the elders head-on. But they could expose them. The rogues had old tech, thoughtcasters buried deep in the wastes, relics from the pre-silence age. Devices that could broadcast raw thought across the nexus. Unfiltered. Unstoppable. Ava offered to speak. Kaelin objected. They'll trace you. They'll kill you. She smiled, weak but resolute. Then make it count. With Island's help, they reactivated the Thoughtcaster. A tower grown from crystalline roots, humming with unstable energy. Ava placed her hand on the core and closed her eyes. And she spoke, not in words, but in feeling. In grief. In memory. In freedom. Every ancient across the network heard her. Not her voice, but her essence. A memory of her brother, laughing before he died. The smell of rain on a ruined world. The choice to forgive instead of fight. The weight of defying orders. The price of love. It was undeniable. The elders tried to shut it down. But they were too late. The signal spread like wildfire. Through cities. Sanctums. Training halls. It sparked confusion. Then doubt. Then fire. Some tore out their nexus threads. Others confronted their mentors. The youngest guardian stood still, uncertain for the first time. Among them, the technician who had sent the signal watched her own elder scream and vanish into light. She didn't flinch. The balance had shifted. Kaelin and Ava watched the sky crack with light. Something had begun. Not war. Not peace. But change. The elders responded with precision. No speeches. No warnings. They activated a full purge directive, targeting every rogue stronghold, every name spoken in Ava's transmission, every anomaly flagged since her arrival. Cities went dark. Thought nets shattered. Dissent became a contagion, and their cure was silence. But they were too late. The Thoughtcaster's signal had fractured more than minds. It exposed cracks in the foundation. Guardians began refusing orders. Archive keepers leaked forbidden histories. A pattern emerged: every elder decision, every command, was built on fear disguised as wisdom. Ava didn't run. She stood in the valley, surrounded by those who had once lived in hiding. Now they trained openly, sharpened tools, mapped paths through the inner territories. They weren't an army. They weren't unified. But they were done being silent. Kaelin took command without asking. Not by force, but by example. He knew the terrain. He knew the tactics. More importantly, he knew how the elders thought. They would strike the tower next, the source of the signal. He was right. The assault began at dawn, lightless drones falling like ash, cutting through trees and stone. The rogues held them back longer than expected, buying time for Ava to move. She carried a memory core, encoded with everything, her words, her thoughts, the broadcast that had started this all. They couldn't hold the valley. But they could scatter the message. Kaelin led her through a collapsing ridge, shielded her with his body when shrapnel pierced the air. They reached a tunnel, old, forgotten. But Ava was hit. Not a fatal wound, but deep. She refused to stop. "We're not dying here," she said. He believed her. They reached a backup transmitter deep underground. It wasn't powerful. It didn't have to be. Just enough to send the core to one place, the ascendant spire. The spire was the elder's heart, the center of the nexus. If the core reached it, even for seconds, the entire species would feel her again. The choice would no longer be theirs. But the transmitter required a manual relay. Kaylin looked at Ava. She shook her head. You're faster. He placed the core, set the timer, and ran. The tunnel began to collapse behind him. Heat surged. Static screamed in his ears. He didn't turn back. The signal launched. In the spire, elders screamed as the humans' presence flooded their minds once more. But this time it wasn't emotion. It was truth. Raw, undeniable, unedited memories of everything she had seen and felt, Kaylin's sacrifice, the purge, the lies. The nexus surged out of control. Minds broke. Others awakened. One elder, Varn, ripped off his crown node and walked into the central forum. This ends now, he said. No one stopped him. Across the territories, statues of law shattered. Obedience dissolved. Silence no longer held power. Kaylin emerged from the tunnel with scorched skin and half his strength. Ava collapsed at the threshold. He carried her to the surface. The rogues were gone, dispersed. But the resistance had spread beyond them. Entire cities were now open. Elders fled or faded into hiding. The spire still stood, but it no longer ruled. It listened. Ava awoke in a healing chamber days later. Her first word was his name. Kaylin, bandaged and barely breathing, smiled and whispered, "You made them feel it." Outside, symbols were being rewritten. Children no longer memorized the one rule. They asked questions instead. The phrase "avoid humans" was struck from every monument. Not replaced. Left blank. The technician who once sent the silent pulse now led reconstruction in the outer cities. She wore no title. She claimed no credit. But her orders were followed. Her first directive: every child would learn the truth of what happened. Ava remained on the planet. Not as a guest. Not as a prisoner. But as something else, uncategorized. Kaylin stood beside her as the first interspecies forum gathered. Not diplomats. Just people who refused to be quiet. No treaty was signed. No alliance declared. But no one walked away. The change was irreversible. Some elders vanished into deep space, unwilling to live in a world they could no longer shape. Others stayed, stripped of power, finally learning. And the ancient ones, no longer bound by one rule, began to remember who they were before fear ruled them. Kaylin and Ava watched as a new script was carved into stone, not with commands, but with questions. What does it mean to choose? What is worth protecting, even at the cost of peace? What happens when we stop obeying and start listening? The answers were still unknown. But for the first time in centuries, they were allowed to be asked. No one declared victory. There were no banners raised, no anthem played. Just quiet. And questions. The elders who remained now walked unguarded. Some offered apologies. Most stayed silent, unsure how to exist without power. Their thrones were dismantled. The spire no longer pulsed with dominance, it hummed like any other structure. For the first time in its long existence, it was just architecture. Ava stayed in the valley, not because she was needed, but because she chose to. Every day, she walked among those who once feared her. They asked her things, not about technology or war, but about choice. About consequence. About love. Kaylin recovered slowly. His body bore the scars of exile and fire, but his mind was sharper than ever. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. Not because he demanded it, but because they knew he had paid the price of truth. A council formed, not of elders, not of rogues, but of voices once unheard. Farmers. Builders. Healers. A former guardian. A technician. A child. No hierarchy. Only decisions weighed, not enforced. The one rule, the old law, was gone. In its place, nothing official was written. That was intentional. Memory was now the law. They would remember what happened, not hide it. Some called for connection with Earth. Others feared it. Ava was clear. If we make contact, we do it with honesty. No lies. No manipulation. We tell them what happened here, and we let them choose what to do with it. The technician developed a transmission relay capable of reaching deep space without tapping the old nexus. It was quiet. Private. Trust-based. Ava composed a message, brief, direct, and human. She told Earth that she had survived. That she had met a people who once feared them. That fear nearly killed her. But so had silence. She didn't ask for rescue. She didn't ask for war. She asked them to listen. Then she shut the relay off. Nothing came back for weeks. Then months. In that silence, life bloomed. The valley grew brighter. Crystals no longer filtered only elder signals, they pulsed with open thought. Children built things without permission. Art, not architecture. Language began to evolve. Words blended, ancient and earthborn, into something new. Kalen started teaching. Not combat. Not law. He taught memory. What he saw. What he did. What he regretted. He never called himself a hero. Ava told him that's exactly why he was one. A faction broke away, those who still believed the elders were right. They built new machines, created safe zones where human thought was filtered. But no one followed them. Not out of defiance, but disinterest. Fear had lost its power when it stopped being shared. Kalen visited the spire once, alone. Inside, it was empty. Dust settled on thrones that would never be filled again. At its heart, he placed something simple, the memory core Ava had once carried. He didn't activate it. He just left it there. A reminder. Ava stood on a cliff one morning, wind cutting through her woven robes. Below, a group of children practiced old guardian stances, modified, looser, full of laughter. She smiled. Not because she had won anything. But because they no longer whispered when they saw her. Kalen joined her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Far above, a signal blinked. A message returned from Earth. Compressed. Short. Just a voice. We hear you. No plan. No delegation. Just acknowledgement. It was enough. Later that week, Ava and Kalen stood before the new forum, smaller, simpler, with no central seat. Someone asked them, "What happens now?" Kalen answered first. "We live." Ava added, "And we don't forget." No monuments were built for either of them. No songs written. But every story began the same way, there was one rule. And they broke it. And because they did, a world changed. Not into perfection. Not into peace. But into something that could finally begin again.